Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we are covering yet another user submission sent in by Steve. And his submission has to do, I titled it Hopping Ghost Light on the website, but essentially they come across a light that I would describe as intelligent, not normal at all, not just an orb, not just a fairy light. I don't know what it is. I don't know if you classify it as a UFO or something else. Very different in the way that this light behaves. We're going to get to that story in just a moment. First, if you have an effed up story of your own, we ask that you submit that to us at our official website. That's at effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. We will get it on the website, and we will get it into a podcast. Now, as you guys know, we're going to be following this podcast that you're listening to now with our near-death experience one. We've gotten quite a few submissions. It's going to be a hell of a podcast. And now we're looking into what we want to cover next. And some stories that we'd be very interested to get from you guys. Like, don't get me wrong. We want whatever you got, whether it's a ghost, whether it's a Ouija board, demonic possession, a UFO, whatever. But in particular, what we would like to get especially would be something along the lines of cryptozoology. So maybe you're a hunter and you've been in the woods and you've seen and heard strange things. You found weird footprints. You've come across things that you know aren't natural. They're not normal animals. As a hunter, as someone who's experienced in the woods, you're seeing things that you know is not right. Maybe you saw Bigfoot. We want these stories. All the scary, out in the dark, in the woods, creepy, scare the shit out of you. We want those stories. So if you got that kind of a story to tell us, please submit that to us so that we can get it into a podcast and get a new exciting one out there on a subject that we don't cover all too often. Not because we don't want to, but just because it's a little more rare. And with that having been said, we're going to get back to Steve's story once again on the official website. If you want to read it, it's called Hopping Ghost Light. So now, as Steve starts off this story, he says, he doesn't have documented proof of the story. And you know what? That's okay. Almost none of these stories have documented proof because you know what? You don't know when something like that is going to happen. You never expect. That's why people don't have cameras. Everybody's like, well, how come nobody ever catches on camera? Because you know what? I really didn't think when I was walking down the road that a UFO was going to abduct me, right? Or when I saw the UFO, I was scared, and I really didn't think to reach in my pocket with my phone as the aliens came down and tried to probe me. It's not natural. That's why we don't have a whole lot of evidence. But, even when we do, nobody believes it, so what difference does it make? So anyway, he doesn't have proof of it, but here's his story. Now, this started in the summer after he graduated in the year 2002. He was hanging out late at night with a group of friends, and they were just driving around in his truck that he had gotten as a grad present from his dad. Really nice gift, by the way. And on some of these nights, they went down to these allegedly haunted locations in the rural areas of town, such as churches and graveyards. But, like myself, who've gone to these alleged places, they never experienced anything. But then one night, they are hanging around their town office, and this is around 2 a.m., they're bored. They're trying to figure out what they want to do. And they get this idea. And the idea was to go and check out this party spot that's just outside of town. And so they drive out there and they get to the location. And just as they assumed was going to be the case, there was nobody there. But, they were there. They went out there. They just said, fuck it. We're just going to stay here and hang out. And so they did. They just hung out and talked. And after about 10 minutes of this, they noticed this light, and it's coming down the grid road just on the other side of the highway. So, they come out the highway, and this grid road that they're speaking of, they said it's on the same highway that they turned off to get to where they are currently, okay? They were uphill, and they could see the highway. They said it was visible from about a mile away. And they see this light, and they thought, okay, well, maybe someone's coming to check out the spot, just like we did. So they continued to, just talk. And then one of the friends, and he said, he'll never forget this. And he got it in quotes. He says, hey, that light is really bright. And then they all looked. And this light is now halfway between them and the highway. So remember now, he said there's about a mile between them and where the highway was. So this is halfway. This light is halfway in between them now. And the first thing that popped into Steve's head was, oh shit, the cops got the spotlight out, right? And right after he thought of this, the light, as they're referring to it, it jumps off the road into the air and behind the trees lining the road on the left side of them. So we're talking about a light that had moved towards them, jumps off the ground, and in behind the trees. And Steve said his heart sank as low as he had ever felt it sink. He said the light wasn't visible anymore, and they all just echoed this, in their own way, what the fuck was that? And nobody was really saying much of anything because they were shocked. And as they were just standing there trying to process what had just happened, and as Steve came back out of this daze, he just says to everybody, let's get in the truck and get ready to bail. And they all scrambled into this truck, and just as everyone got in, he could see the light pointing at them through the leaves and the trees at the tree line. And this is about 30 feet away now, right? 30 feet away, 20 feet in the air, and it's approaching them slowly. So Steve starts the engine, and they get the hell out of there. And he said he had friends in the bed of his truck, and they were scared as hell driving down the highway, just passing this thing. Right? They were terrified, because they didn't know what it was. What's going to happen when we pass this thing? But thankfully, the light didn't follow them. It didn't jump back on the road. But, by the time they get halfway to the highway, the light had pretty much disappeared, right? So they drive back into town. They're glad to see the city. They're glad to be away from this. And they went back to the town office. They get out of the truck, and they began to discuss what they had just seen. So they sat around for about a half an hour. And after they got the fear out of their system, Steve's like, we got to go back. And I'm right with him there on that page. That's what I'm like too. He was curious. He had to know what the hell this thing was. And as you might expect, a few of the guys didn't want to go back, right? But there were more of them that were curious about it than there weren't, and so they were outvoted. So the decision was in Steve's favor. Either they sat there alone at the town hall and they waited for them to come back, or they came with them. So they all went, and the reluctant ones muttering vulgar frustrations under their breath as they went. And so they start driving out, and they approach this area slowly. They're cautious now. And they're making sure that this light's not just going to pop out and kind of catch them with their pants down. And, by his admission, nothing seemed to be there. They get back to the location, and they parked in almost the exact same spot. And as they got out of the truck, and they were especially quiet, whispering, because they wanted to hear everything that was happening around them. And after about 10 minutes, just like before, the sun started to light up the sky. And they were beginning to think that, what they had experienced the first time, they were starting to think that this was just a one-time thing. They weren't going to see this light again. And as soon as he thought that, there it was again. A bright light on the other side of the highway. It crossed the highway, and it made its way down the road towards them yet again. None of them spoke. They just stood there and watched it approach. And when it got close, it jumped over the trees again. And deja vu, right? Steve screams at everybody to get back into the truck. And they all get in, but this time they don't drive right away. They just remain quiet. And they just kept watching this light as it slowly approached them from the trees. And as it got closer and closer, he said it got closer than it did before. It actually got so close that it started to light up the inside of the cab in his truck. And then it jumped over the trees, back onto the road about 20 feet in front of them. And at that point, Steve starts the truck. And as soon as the lights of the truck actually turn on, the light they were watching vanishes. And once again, they speed out of there. They head back to town. They sat there until, they didn't even go home. They sat there until the sun was fully up again before Steve began to drive everybody home. And he said, that summer they went back many different times, hoping that they would see this thing again. And of course, they never did. And he doesn't know what it is. Is it a ghost light? Is it a UFO full of aliens? And even to this day, he says, he lives about an hour away from that town, and he has plans to go back and try to see this thing again, maybe get some evidence. And, the only thing that he can describe it to or to compare it to is the St. Louis ghost light. But he said, this particular light that they saw was much brighter than that. So, if he does get some evidence, he says he's going to send it in. I'm hopeful for that. But that, like I said, a different kind of light, right? It seems to have an intelligence to it. It approached them. It hopped. That's the thing that kind of got me. You got a UFO, okay, it can fly, right? Or if it's what's it called? A faerie light or a Willo the wisp or whatever. It's kind of, it's kind of waist level generally. That's why the old tale of the, I forget his name now, but they said that he would carry a charcoal in his hand through the woods to lure people, and it was like waist height, right? These things are waist height. So what the hell is it? What kind of a light can kind of hover on the ground and hop up like that behind tree lines, and right? What's your take on it, Ryan?
It's, I think for me, one of the interesting aspects of the story being that, not only did it seem to be intelligently driven or manipulated because of its motion, but it also seemed to, well, at least, the way he tells the story, it seems to react to his thoughts. When he's thinking, specific things, all of us, oh my God, I hope this isn't the cops. And then bam, it's like, oh, don't worry, I'm not the cops. Look, I just flew over a tree line and land, there seemed to be a level of communication there, which I find very interesting. And, I guess if you look through mythology and, including UFO stories, we can call that modern mythology. And I don't say that to say that, it's like Hansel and Gretel story, UFO tales, because I am a believer in extraterrestrial life, and visitation,
And Hansel and Gretel.
and Hansel and Gretel. I mean, um, Jesus Christ. um, if you look through, history and different stories, um, there does seem to be a connection with strange lights of seemingly intelligent origin, almost as if, over all these long centuries and millennia, we've been observed. They're observers, and of course, there's all kinds of tales of watchers and spirits and entities of all shapes and sizes and forms. Um, but the anomalous light, I think, is probably one of the most common archetypes that we see for this.
Well, I'm gonna give you two real quick examples of a light that is intelligent. That's similar to this one that Steve's speaking of. Okay, first of all, Skinwalker Ranch, right? Remember that light that came in and it was like playfully luring
it's like
the
a
guys.
softball-sized orb of blue light or something.
Yeah, and it was like playfully luring the dogs into the tree line. As soon as they get in there, yelp, the owner gets in there and it's just a gray puddle of goo, right? That's one example. Second example, and this comes from my friend Lenny. When I was out doing a college course, I'd already done my first year, and in my second year, Lenny had came out there and, he was doing something. Anyway, I ran into him. It was around Christmas time, and I shared with him the story that that previous summer, me and my wife, the UFO that we saw. I'm not going to share that story again. It's in our playlist if you want to listen to it. Anyway, I shared my story to him, and then he shared one with me. And his story, he was staying at the dorm. Unlike me, I had an apartment. Anyway, he was in the hallway of the school. I mean, that's where the dorm is, right? It's in the school. And anyway, there was like 4 or 5 of them. It was a group of them anyway, and they were standing around the hallway, and they were looking out the window. It's the evening time. It was dark, actually, and they look out and they see this light. And this light, as he put it, was dancing around the sky in impossible ways. It really scared the shit out of, it spooked Lenny, and it scared the other guys with him there. But the thing that stuck with me, right? Because, I mean, I don't remember all the details now, but the thing that stuck with me, and Ryan, you can attest this, Lenny is a very serious guy. I mean, he doesn't really...
he's not one given for tales.
No, like, he's not, like, he likes stuff like that. Well, not really, though. He's not really into that stuff. He's he's a very matter-of-fact guy. I mean, he's not really into the paranormal so much. I don't know how much stock he believes in that stuff. Truthfully.
And I definitely wouldn't label him as a jokester.
No, and he's a bit of a badass. If you piss him off, he'll probably beat the crap out of you. But anyway, the way he looked at me and said, I mean, this is God is fearless, right? I mean, he's fearless. And so it really stuck with me how he was describing this. And he looked at me. He was like, Willo, man, and he said, if I had to describe that light, he said, it's almost like it could think. Like it was jumping around the sky, like it was trying to communicate. It's like it was intelligent. And just the way he said it and the look on his face and how serious he was, I mean, that set the tone. I mean, I can tell you guys that it might not mean a whole lot because you don't have the perspective of what this guy is like, and you can't understand that, but just take it from me that that meant something. It meant more coming from Lenny than just some regular guy, right? It had a weight to it. So that's another example of these lights, and they're, just like Steve's story. It was an intelligent light. It could think. It's like it could read your mind, and it was trying to communicate. It was almost playfully playing with them, right? I mean, I really don't know what the purpose is. I mean, as smart as the light might be, nobody knows what the hell it's talking about. I don't know. I really don't know what the answer is, but really bizarre, truly bizarre. Now, that having been said, I hope you guys did enjoy the story. I think that this light in particular is kind of distinctive and different from, say, a fairy light,
an anomalous light way off in the sky. I mean, this is something that's a little more intimate. It was at first they had mistaken it for a vehicle, and then for it to go from hovering right over the road at around headlight height to leaping into the trees. It really, you put yourself in that situation. You're watching this light come down this road, this dark country road, and all of a sudden, quick, it's across off into the woods. And I mean, you're sitting there, you're forced to try and reconcile in your mind, what could this be? What, and there's no immediate source or logical explanation for it, and I mean, it's one of those things that the experience itself isn't it wasn't like it was shooting hellfire and there was booming voices coming out of it and it gave everybody nosebleeds and visions, but out of your normal everyday experience, doesn't include a waist high balls of light jumping up off of the road and into tree lines. It's just another example of a very long list of examples that you could call our playlist as such a list of examples of reasons why mystery still exists in this world. I mean, obviously everybody out there gets at this point. I'm a big science geek. I love science, and I'm always looking at the logical. But I've spent so many years studying, both science and the metaphysical world that while I do believe in certain physical laws and certain logical truths about the world that we live in, it's also just as obvious to me that there are lots of instances where those physical laws are broken or bent beyond recognition, and people are thrown into experiences so far outside of our normal waking logical daily lives that it really makes you question what is the true nature of the world that we're living in here.
Well, generally it's all mundane and boring, but that's why we like this stuff. Right? So with that having been said, thank you, Steve, for sending in that story. And again, if you guys have an effed up story of your own, we'd like to have it so we can put it on the website and get it in a podcast. You can get that to us at effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. And in particular, something we are looking for, if you have your own story, even a third-hand story, as long as, not something you took off the internet, someone maybe your uncle, I don't know, whatever. If you got a story on cryptozoology, some kind of cryptid creature, maybe you were, again, like you're a hunter, you're out in the woods, you hear and see stuff that's not normal, you're seeing tracks that's not normal, you experience some kind of terrifying ordeal, and we know it's not nature. We want that story. A camping trip gone bad, and no, I'm not talking about Brokeback Mountain. We're not going there. But, if you got a cryptid creature story, we'd really like to hear it. Send that.
Creatures out of time, or Montauk monsters, or Bigfoot, whatever you got.
Yeah, get that into us, and we'll put it in a podcast, and we'll thank you for it. And the people will thank you for it. You'll be a hero. It's a good thing to do. And with that said, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we will catch you next time. Good night.
Thank you very much for listening. Have a great evening, everybody.